So I'm coming to you today from the unceded Malacity country in southern Tasmania. And as you've introduced, I work for Environment Tasmania. So in thinking about this talk and this section around regenerative wealth for the oceans, I just wanted to preface that when I think about that concept, I think about kind of job creation, benefits to local communities, improvements in the ecosystem, and improvements to health and society, as well as environmental challenges. And the work that I've done with Environment Tasmania is a really interesting topic to come under regenerative wealth creation. So Environment Tasmania is a conservation council, and we're best known for leading the alliance that stopped the super trawler Margaris from fishing in Australian waters, and also for our part in the Tasmanian Forest Agreement, which enabled us to deliver 172,000 hectare extension to the Tasmanian wilderness and World Heritage Area. But since then, we've really focused our efforts in the marine space for the last 9 years. I've been involved for about the last 3 years of that as a campaigner and a community organiser. And my work has been largely on working around the Tasmanian industrial salmon industry, trying to get improvements to the industry, increased transparency and real regulation so that it can become a more regenerative source of wealth, if you like, for Tasmanians. So I got involved with this on a personal level long ago. I've been lucky enough to grow up on the banks of the Huon River, and if I had better internet connection, I'd go outside and show you. I grew up here as a kid with a marine biologist mum, and she actually worked at New South Wales Fisheries helping to create that Jervis Bay Marine Park. So that was another moment of Pia's talk that pricked my ears up. Both my parents were keen fisher people and sailors, and we used to spend a lot of time in a little dinghy out in Petches Bay, which is out in the front of our house. So in the mid-80s, my parents were picnicking on the river, and that was the year I was born, when they saw the first of the salmon pens being towed up the Huon. So they'd heard about this kind of coming development to the area, but it took them a moment to recognise the farms. So they were a boat tugging incredibly slowly up the river with these kind of flat platform-looking things being towed behind them. And at that stage, the industry was really tiny. It was boutique, and its products were of a very high quality. And thinking about what Rob mentioned around seafood really stuck with me, that the less you transform it, the better. We should be looking at seafood as a very high quality source of nutrient, not as a mass commodity. So yeah, at that stage, it was almost cottage-sized industry. By the time I was about halfway through primary school, we'd noticed that we just weren't seeing the same kind of life in the Huon. We used to see fiddleback rays and little penguins, heart urchins, eels, seagrass meadows, up and down the river and from the boat when we popped out. Increasingly, I was noticing that we just saw more of these introduced Pacific oysters, a kind of silty bottom instead of the sandy bottom, and we were seeing just less life. We weren't seeing the same kind of animals out there. But I wasn't panicking. I really assumed that the regulators were doing their job and that these things were being looked after. In year 9, I remember doing a science project on the algae covering the rocky points around the beaches near my house to try and show how I could see it was directly related to the salmon pens. We knew the river wasn't going okay. It was becoming really obvious at that stage. At one point, I kind of shut my heart off to it, and I had to just try and unconditionally love the river as it was, even in a degraded state, because I really couldn't see any way to change what was happening. So it was years and years later that some very clever and fierce women came to Tasmania. Laura Kelly and Beck Hubbard came to work at Environment Tasmania, and they could see what was happening with the salmon industry. We've got some really interesting and incredible things happening in these waters. We've got very high levels of biodiversity and species endemism. We've got sort of iconic endangered species like the handfish, and we've got rare environments like the tannin-stained river mouths. The water that flows down from the forests and grasslands and bush stain the rivers a red-brown colour. And then we get species growing in shallow water that you'd usually only ever find down deep because of that kind of the blocking of the light by the tannin, which mimics a deep water environment. So part of our work at Environment Tasmania has really been to speak about the stories of the coast and the sea and the people who love it, to connect Tasmanians to the marine environment. We don't have a kind of barrier reef style bikini tourism down here. Our tourism industry relies really heavily on raincoats and down jackets, and our ocean, you know, some of it's turquoise and white sandy bottoms, and some of it is inky black with kelp forests and big rocky cliffs and beating waves. So we are struggling to get our marine areas protected, and we've got less than 1% at the moment in full marine park zone. So we're really falling well behind at the global goals. We also have some of the fastest warming water in the world, and the waters off Tasmania have been flagged as a marine global warming water hotspot. The East Australian current, which comes down, is extending, and it's warming those waters. And we're seeing a kind of species range extension, which I think that the wonderful Greta Peckel will speak to later on in the day. But we're finding tropical sea snakes washing up on our East Coast beaches. There are green turtles who are cold and confused, but we're seeing a range extension of species that are arriving, and some of them are breeding. Year to year, we are seeing the changes. It means that Tasmania's waters, we're the last in the line. So those cold water species are being pushed further south. Their range is being impacted, and we desperately need to protect these areas from further pressure so that we can maintain some habitat for those species. So I can speak about the salmon industry as one of the main challenges to protecting our marine environment. So in terms of scale, from that tiny kind of cottage industry in the mid-80s, the Tasmanian salmon is now, this Atlantic salmon is now the most eaten fish in Australia. 2 years ago, they produced 66,000 tonnes of salmon, and it's a billion-dollar industry. The job creation figures aren't consistent between sources, but the Australia Institute calculated jobs at just 1% of the jobs in the state in 2020. Again, regenerative wealth from the oceans. I feel the salmon industry could be giving back more. The industry has been plagued with issues, and I won't go deeply into it here, but we have big issues with the regulatory environment where, for example, the Marine Farming Review Panel has been mired in controversy since the two experts, Barbara Novak and Louise Cherry, quit the panel in late 2018 because they felt it was inherently compromised. They were quite scathing. They told a parliamentary inquiry that this body is not independent and has no legal option other than to ultimately greenlight new fish farming developments. They didn't feel that they could do the job that it was designed to do. There are big issues with animal welfare. So some of the things that we found around seal treatment, we applied for a right to information last year, which found not just high numbers of deterrents used on Australian fur seals and protected New Zealand fur seals, but that there was a problematic culture around seal management within one of the companies, and that even the estimates and reporting of the seal deaths and injury were likely a large underestimate, as many seals with an injury would be leaving the area and dying outside the leases unrecorded. And we can speak to that. We find seals washed up on the beaches, which are often ignored because they're not fresh enough to autopsy from Dupipwe's position. So the newest data on seal underwater explosives is that just one company alone, Huon Aquaculture, released more than 8,000 underwater explosives from the beginning of last year until last month. So we've got new projections around fur seal abundance from CSIRO. We're looking at a 150% increase over the next 40 years. So we're very concerned that this problem is going to get worse before it gets better. Last year, we moved from a traditional campaign situation where we were talking to Tasmanians about salmon to talking to the mainlanders about salmon, talking to the salmon customers. So this is one of the pieces that tells a very short story of what's happening in the aquaculture industry to people who've never heard it before.
Most people think eating Australian salmon is a healthy choice. Problem is, most Australian salmon isn't wild, it's farmed. Industrially farmed salmon are fed chicken feathers, abattoir byproducts, and antibiotics. And because it takes almost 2 kilograms of wild fish to make 1 kilogram of farmed salmon, it's emptying our oceans too. Farm infrastructure is threatening endangered species habitat, and the industry dumps 10.6 million kilograms of fish feces a year into our ocean, creating marine dead zones under salmon pens. To take action, visit www.salmon.org.au, because salmon farms harm.
So moving on, because I think we are getting short on time. Here are just some statistics around that kind of wealth, which is not coming back into the Tasmanian community. So with $3.8 billion worth of fish sold over the 5 years up to 2019, only $64 million of taxes paid. 9.3 million in subsidies were received in 2 of those years. Now, the annual lease and licence fees, which are paid to the state government, were $923,000 for the entire industries. That's less than the salary of one CEO of one company in the industry alone. So in terms of the kind of wealth creation capacity of this industry and what's coming back to the community, we are very keen to see improvement. Next up, we've got a slightly disturbing photo of some of the seals which have been photographed and released as part of the RTI, the Right to Information documents from last year. The seal on the right has got a beanbag bullet lodged in its eye and was swimming around, needed to be euthanized. The one on the left has kind of bruising and a propeller wound, which is standard for the deaths that do get reported. I think there were 70 seal deaths at salmon farms from the beginning of 2018 to May 21. So, yes. Lately, we've seen the Legislative Council Committee handing down a final report with concerns around disease outbreaks and biosecurity concerns and a compromised approvals process. This committee has recommended a plan to reduce the inshore fish farming sites and cease operations in sensitive shelters and biodiverse areas. It's also stipulated, and I thought of Kate reading this, that other aquaculture farming regions outside Australia stipulate and regulate the publication of industry data to a greater degree than occurs in Tasmania. So we are asking for more transparency from the industry. And this latest report from the Legislative Council gives us some hope. We've worked on this for 9 years, and it's gone from largely an unknown issue where we were regarded as radicals to an environmental issue on a national scale. We worked with Richard Flanagan to write his sellout book last year, Toxic, and we've seen now 2 new environmental organisations take up the salmon farming fight for accountability. We've also had great support from local chefs like Matthew Evans, whose quote sums it up. Truly clean green salmon farming is probably possible, but it has yet to be proven. And salmon farming, the way it's currently done, really needs social licence. Hiding environmental reports, using wild fish in the feed, and taking no responsibility for waste from salmon farms are all good reasons to expect more from our salmon producers. Can they continue to do what they've done for the last 2 decades forever? The science seems to suggest not. And I really like that, that question of, can they continue to do what they've done for the last 2 decades forever? To move forward to a paradigm where we're really thinking about regenerative wealth from the ocean, it seems like very clear that we need to be thinking on a long time scale, not a short time scale. We need to be thinking beyond company profits. We need to be looking at all the stakeholders, and that's including the plants and animals and environments in which this commerce kind of takes place. And I think that's my time up. So really all we've got left to say is that moving forward, our next piece of work is really just about working with the Tasmanian community, with scientists, fisher people, with the Indigenous landowners, chefs, and all of the thousands of beach and ocean lovers. We want to make the community's voice heard, and we want to drive policy to reflect the needs and the wants of these communities. And I'll leave off with this photograph, which is not far. This is a short dinghy row from the front of where I live. So a very scenic version of what the salmon farms can look like from the surface. So thank you very much for having me, and congratulations on hosting such an excellent event.